And now I'm live. I was sitting there and I didn't hit the go live button. Um, Sorry about that. Hello, everybody. We'll do this again. I see Six Cats Press and I see Cats Chaos Cafe. I saw Shannon on earlier, a bunch of other people. Thank you so much for joining. I'm so happy. This is my first AuthorTube writing conference, and I'm honored to be here. I'm excited about it. Big shout out to everyone involved in the writing conference. They were so organized and, very easy to, follow the instructions and get involved, and just very, very great, well organized. Huge special shout out for Shannon, who's running this thing, SD Houston, and for Six Cats Press and Cats Chaos Cafe for moderating my stream today. So the topic is writing immortal characters, and I have a caveat for this, which is it could apply, but it's not really my target. I'm not really talking about long-lived and or immortal characters like gods, elves, dwarves, fairies necessarily. What I'm shooting for is sort of the human or some supernatural being who was raised human and discovers or becomes long-lived or immortal. A good example of that would be a vampire. Or if you subscribe to the idea that werewolves are immortal, someone that turns into a werewolf, or maybe someone who's half fae and they've lived their whole life and suddenly stop aging, and then they start asking questions, and what are they like 100 years later? So that's what we're after. Figuring out what happens to kind of the human psyche, your whole outlook on life as just a regular person when you're thrust into this immortal life. And I started thinking about this, not just because I was writing a vampire myself, but because I was reading a lot of fiction that had these long-lived, or you'd see them in movies where these folks would be, old, and they just become like stoic, these apathetic statues of people. A really good example, I think, is in Queen of the Damned, when you have these ancient vampires they're just so old, they're just like statues. They don't move, they don't talk, they don't really do anything, until a stock comes along and they're like, that person's interesting. But they just live hundreds of years, just shut down. And I had to ask myself, at what point in their life, in their unlife or whatever, did they give up or just say, I'm done. I'm done doing things. So I really wanted to look at that and dig in a little bit into the human psyche. If you have an immortal character, or if you're planning to write an immortal character, or someone that's just going to be long-lived, hopefully you'll find some of this stuff helpful. So I may have to consult my notes here and there, but I have most of the stuff memorized. I think the first thing we need to do is look, because there are no 400-year-old people walking around, right? So I think the only people we have to rely on are people that are regular people in life that are in their 90s or 100 or even older, and look at them and say, well, how do they act? And I don't know about you, but I remember my great grandmother and my great aunt both passed when they were in their 90s, late 90s, and they were funny. They were still joking around. They were still spitfires. They never lost that, I want to say, youth, and certainly not everybody, but I think that's a choice. I think you go through life and you have a certain outlook, and you either lose it or you don't. So I wanted to start there with that is kind of like the building block is people that we know in life and what we can learn from them. I think the first thing to ask yourself, if you have an immortal character, is do they want to retain that semblance of youth? And if they want to let themselves just kind of give up like those ancient vampires, right? Do they want to stay current? Do they want to stay youthful? Do they want to keep their sense of humor? Because sometimes it's a choice, but sometimes it's not. I remember seeing a video, and it was these two elderly women. They were sitting next to one another, and it was a mother and daughter. And the mother was like over 100 years old. She was like 100 and something years old. And she's sitting next to her daughter, and her daughter is in her 80s. And they're kind of just sitting there, and they have these big coats. And the mother reaches into her pocket suddenly, and she pulls out a candy. And then she kind of nudges her daughter, and the daughter looks over. And as soon as she sees the candy, she's like, oh, ooh. It was almost childlike. It was like this excitement, like, oh, candy. And here's this woman who's probably pushing 90. She retains that youth in her heart, in her head, whatever that may be. And you have to ask yourself a question. If this woman had lived another 100 years, would that go away magically? Would that suddenly just disappear? Like she doesn't care about candy anymore? Like, I want to be 90 and still care about candy. That's my attitude. I'm not going to live to 400, but if I could, I'd still want candy. Those are the kind of things. But on the flip side of that, I saw these heartbreaking pictures that were taken in the early 1900s of children that worked in factories before we had laws to prevent those sort of things. And these were, 6-year-olds, 5-year-olds. And the look on their faces was like this, their eyes were almost just dull, and their brows were furrowed, and they'd lost that, they'd been robbed of their childhood. So you could have an immortal person who, regardless of how old they could be, and whether they want to retain that or not, the choice could be taken from them, where they're not in a position where they can keep that innocence or that youth or that spark, whatever it is. That's a choice you'll need to make in your setting with your characters. I think that's the first thing you probably need to solve is do they want to, and are they able to keep that youth in their heart? The other question you would ask yourself is there a need? Because is there a compelling need for them to do it? Because maybe they don't really care about that kind of stuff, but maybe they have to. So I'll give an example, and it's easy for me to give examples in vampires because, but let's say you're out hunting, right? And you're a 300-year-old vampire, and you look like you're in your 20s, but you're not. You're 300 something years old. And maybe you don't really care about the whimsy that you had in your 20s, but you need to be able to blend in. You're in a nightclub or something, and you want to talk to someone to lure them out of the club. And the last thing you want to do is start using, colloquialisms from the 1800s or something, some old slang that's gone out of date like 200 years ago. I mean, you probably don't even want to say stuff like groovy, because if no 20-year-old is going to be using words from the 1950s, let alone anything else. So there may be a pressing need for your character to keep that level of, or at least youth, put on a veneer of youth, even if they're not really, even if they've lost that in their heart, they may have to put on a good act and know how to fool somebody. So you have a lot of different things to consider. Is this a legitimate, honest attempt at youth, or are they just putting on an act? Why do they need to put on an act? what's going on in your setting, what exterior, forces are pressing on them that either prevent them from staying with the times or force them to stay with the times. Those are some big questions to ask yourself. I do want to take some. I want to like talk a bunch and then like open it up for like a bunch of questions, but I see a bunch of stuff coming through, so I want to take some questions. Yeah, I mean, immortal characters I think are fun to write. I think they're challenging too. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, there's lots of immortal things out there. Highlander, if you ever saw that movie, there's lots of ways to give someone immortality. Maybe they're a demigod. I mean, I don't know what you have going on, but there's lots of stuff out there that could fit this bill. Yes, the candy video. Yeah, you can find it. I don't know what you'd search under, but it was very sweet. Exactly. I mean, that's my question. Why do older people lose their spark? Why do they need to become stoic? I don't see why they need to. I think we've all known people that maybe we went to high school with them or whatever, or we knew them when we were kids, and you bump into them years later and I don't know, they grow up, but they lose that, I don't know, their sense of humor, that youth or whatever it is, and they just become this, you're like, wow, Todd used to be hilarious and he was so much fun and such a free spirit, and now he's just, maybe these exterior forces pushed Todd into a place where he just couldn't enjoy things the way that he used to, or celebrate things the way that he used to. He's too busy worrying about his mortgage or his job or all these things. Those are questions that you gotta kind of ask yourself is, before this person was 700 years old in your book, what were the last 700 years like? What exterior forces were pressing upon this person along the way, and how did they get through it? Yeah, that's the children, the poor children working in factories. Some people that I know of who have been through the most have the brightest smiles, at least later in their life. It's so true. It's so true. My great grandmother, she used to just joke around all the time, always smiling. I mean, look, everybody has tough times. Some lives are tougher than others, of course. And, those waters aren't easily navigated for everybody, depending on what life throws at you. Hopefully for the average person, and maybe for your character, they've had the luxury of being able to navigate those waters and choose to keep that joy of life, but maybe not. Maybe this character is a villain of yours, or an anti-hero, or some kind of antagonist. Maybe you need them to be to have lost that spark. I don't think it's time that does it. I think it's other forces, your choices that you make, and the things that life throws at you. They're making that happen to you, or you're choosing to do that to yourself. I doth say the young miss wouldst thou perchance desire to accompany your humble servant to yon alley. This is the vampire scenario, right? In order that I might feed upon your life force. Yeah, exactly. You're speaking, old English, and this person's like, what now? That would be awkward. A lot of red flags. Oh, yes. Great suggestion. Thank you. If you have a question, put a Q in front of it. One of my favorite works, one of my works was one of the POVs is the first turned vampire, and another is a brand new vampire. Oh, I love that. The difference between the young and the old. I have in my latest book coming up, I have a vampire who's very, very old, and he was interesting to write. And I kind of went through this exercise with him because he was super, super old. And I'm thinking, how do I write this guy? You know, and it ended up being a lot of fun writing him because of these kind of questions that I was asking myself. Yeah. Oh, they're remaking Highlander? Oh boy. Well, I gotta get on that. We'll see how that happens. See how that goes. Yeah, imagine that in a modern nightclub. One of the main points, this is from Devin, one of the main points in my trilogy is that this one princess is barded over because she has the ability to birth an immortal. Oh, wow. Oh, thank you. Yes, thank you for that too. So I think the other questions that you kind of have to ask yourself, do they want to stay with the times? Do they need to stay with the times? Can they stay with the times? Is this something that even if they want to desperately, can they do it? And I'll give an example of that with myself. I have a son who's Gen Z, and Gen Z has their own slang. And I remember some years ago, he was using the word yeet, and I had no idea what yeet meant. So I asked him, I was like, what does yeet mean? And he told me, just yeet something away. And had I not access to a son of that age or a child of that age, I probably would have gone through probably years, maybe seeing this word on the internet and going, what is this? Looking it up on Urban Dictionary, if I cared to. And maybe I didn't care enough. I don't know, but it was very accessible for me to go, what does this word mean? And that's an example of like, is it accessible? Maybe your immortal lives on an island somewhere, and they've lived on this island, this castle in the middle of the ocean or something for hundreds of years, and time has gone by, and maybe they're, hip, whatever passed for hip in the 1800s, but not anymore. They're completely out of touch with what's going on. And they may have that spark of youth, but they've been shut out of the rest of the world. Or maybe they were asleep, like a Rip Van Winkle scenario where they wake up, or they were in cryogenics, frozen, and they wake up like 100 years later, and they still have that youth in their mind or in their heart, but it's that all that stuff that they need to be young and blend in is not accessible anymore, or not easily accessible. They've lost all that time. So those are some big questions, and believe me, and if anyone in the stream thinks of other things that maybe I missed, shout them out, let me know, because I think those are the big four. Is, do they want to stay with the times? Do they need to stay with the times? Can they? Is it even possible? And if it is, how accessible is it? Maybe they've got that island and they're shut off from the world, but they have the internet, so they're vicariously doing it that way, so all these different things. And, another thing to do, I like to think that I'm in my 50s now, and I like to think that I still have kind of the heart that I've always had, my mindset and everything. But I can tell you, when I was a teenager, right, a bunch of us, I think my friend, I had a friend that got his license in his car before I did. And we drive around in his car as teenagers. And it was like a big deal. Like, oh, he has a car. Let's go driving. Right. And then we'd lean out the window and just shout stuff, just stupid teenage, whatever, at age 50 something, I have no desire to get in my car and drive around my own town, driving down back streets and, neighborhoods of my own town for no reason. Nor do I have any inclination to roll down my window and shout things. Right? So in a way, I've lost a little bit of that, but at the same time, I feel like if I saw a bunch of teenagers coming down my street, rolling down the window, just shouting random stuff, I'd laugh. So I still get it, even though I've left that kind of thing behind. And then you have to ask yourself, okay, well, let's fast forward. Is there something that, a 90-year-old would do or would no longer do, and look at a 50-year-old and go, that's, I don't do that sort of thing anymore. Maybe, and age is, I don't know that we need to start looking at things in terms of like, 400-year difference between this person and this person. We start seeing disparaging opinions across a single generation. I mean, how many of you can relate to maybe your parents listening to the music that you listened to as a teenager and being like, ugh, just turning their nose up at whatever music you were listening to? That's one generation removed. If I tried to hold a conversation with a 12-year-old and listen to the things that upset a 12-year-old, like maybe the drama that they're going through in middle school or whatever, how many times have we had adults, do you remember being a kid yourself, and you go to them and you explain to an adult what has you so upset? Maybe something happened in school that day, and you were, because Brenda did something or said something, and you're pissed off, and your parents were dismissive, like, oh, come on, that's not even, wait till you get older, and it's not that they don't care. I feel like it's more that they just are so far removed from that level of drama that it's hard for them to kind of rewind and put themselves in that place and go, oh yeah, I know what that's like. Maybe you had parents that were more understanding. I know I had parents that just, they felt like they didn't remember, maybe they didn't remember. Because I'd get upset about, whatever was going on in school, and they'd be like, nah, believe me, this is a drop in the bucket. Don't even worry about it. So what happens if you're 400 years old and you're now trying to relate to someone in their 90s, and then this person in their 90s is worried about Medicare and retirement and all this kind of stuff and whatever's happening with Social Security, and this 400-year-old person, is like, come on, like, what do you worry about this stuff for? Making light of that kind of thing. And it's not that the older person doesn't care. It's not that they're apathetic. It's not that they're callous or mean necessarily. It could just mean that they just forgot, and they don't know how to rewind that mindset back again. Like me talking to a 12-year-old, I'd have to really, like, geez, what was I in the 6th grade? I'd have to really think about like what mattered to me back then. So, the other thing is music. If you're looking for a way to like age your character without necessarily turning them into a statue, things like music, trends, fashion, anything pop culture, slang, those are really great things, because you could have a character who's very youthful in their mind or in their heart, and their slang is like 20 years old, or their fashion sense is just way out. They're still wearing bell bottoms, whatever they've got going on, they think they're still dressing like whatever decade it may have been, or maybe their taste in music. Like I mentioned, like one generation, people tend to, they don't like their kids' music, you know what I mean? That sort of thing. How many people do you know that these folks, and maybe you yourself can relate to this, you hit sometime in your 30s if any of you are in your 30s. If not, it's coming. And you just kind of go, yeah, I'm kind of done with new music. Not interested in new music. The best music was in the, and you just insert whatever decade it was when you were in your 20s, right? Oh, the best music was in the 90s. The best music was in the 70s. My father insists that the best music was in the late 60s. I mean, I kind of have to give him points for that, because you've got like the Beatles and the Stones and Led Zeppelin and all this stuff. But I know tons of people that insist the best music was in the 90s. And look, there's a lot of great music in the 90s and 80s. And, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole necessarily, but there's a point when people stop staying current with music. And that's just regular mortal people who are young. They're still in their 30s and they're just like, imagine what a struggle it would be if you were inclined to not care about modern music and suddenly you're 50s, you're in your 60s and your 70s and 100 years old and you still look like you're in your 20s, and you're just walking around going, trying to talk to some other 20-year-old and trying to blend in. Maybe you need to blend in for some reason. And you're like, yeah, I love 21 Pilots, the best, and, you have to really try to stay current. And this could be anything. It doesn't have to be music. It could be fashion. It could be slang, like me not knowing yeet, right? And slang changes all the time. Within 10 years, you'll have a new dialect almost. It takes a lot of work. Staying current with technology is another example. Does your 800-year-old immortal character know how to connect his Bluetooth device to his car? Can they operate a DVD player? Can they get on the internet and browse for things and look things up? There's lots of ways to show that your character is old or immortal without falling on that trope of, yeah, they're just this apathetic, stoic being. And I mean, if that's the way you need them to be, the apathetic, stoic being, if that fits your story, if that fits your narrative, maybe this guy's had a miserable life and he's just done, then by all means. But it doesn't have to be the only path forward. And I feel like we see that trope, the immortal, apathetic, stoic person. We see that trope so often. I like having or seeing characters that they're immortal and they're doing really great over here, staying current and keeping up with things. And then they trip over this other stuff. And these other, youthful people that they're trying to hang out with or blend in with, they're like, what? And there's like these little stumbling moments. And sometimes that's a good way to inject humor into your book as well, your stories. Let's shoot. Oh, a bunch more stuff. Let's do. I've been missing a lot of stuff here. You don't know the Gen Z slang. Yeah, it changes a lot. I feel like Gen Z, maybe it happened in the 80s too, because that's when I was a teenager. But I feel like Gen Z is just cranking out all these new words. Yeah, it helps. It helps the teens keep you up. Not that I need to blend in with anybody, but I like knowing, I like being, and my son keeps me up to date with music. He'll be like, hey Dad, check this out. I like some of it, but not all of it, but I try to stay current because I like music and there's good music all the time, so I'm trying not to hit the eject button when it comes to music. Meme chat. Yeah. That's a great vampire question. I guess it depends on what kind of lore you follow with your vampires. They could be like my gods and return to Earth to maintain balance. I love that idea. That's the loophole, the welcome mat. Okay, how about this? Tip on what to say if someone with a seafood allergy. I'm not sure I follow. Tip on what to say when someone has a seafood allergy. Oh, I had to keep reading. Sorry, never mind. I'm with you. I like this one. I like that one. You have my shrimpathies. I'll see myself out now. I love it. You lived an experience, you realize it doesn't matter. So that's why your parents can't relate. Yeah. I mean, it's not like they're lousy people. They're just it's just they've lived through their life where they're paying mortgages and going to jobs and paying the bills and all this, and you're like, somebody said a mean thing on the playground or whatever. I don't know. I can't even think of an example. That's I'm guilty of being so far removed from it too. That's why I listen to my boys 20 and 16. Yeah, it's a big deal for them, and I won't dismiss it. I'll give you my advice. I'll give my advice because I'm aware. Yeah. Yeah, cat daddy counts. Totally counts. Absolutely. You got responsibilities. They're independent, but they need you. People live in bubbles in any moments of time. The immortal might have forgotten, but that's no excuse to dismiss. I agree. What about someone who is just made immortal and now they suddenly have no motivation because you have all the time? I love this. All the time that needs to be done. I've always been fascinated with people who got turned. Yeah, that's a great example. In my book, The Unlife of Lisa Cooper. By the way, for those of you, we're going to be giving away a hardcover of The Unlife of Lisa Cooper at the end of the stream. So whoever, among those who are around at the end, we're going to give away. I should have mentioned that at the top of the stream, right? On hardcover of The Unlife of Lisa Cooper. But yeah, in my upcoming sequel, there's another vampire that kind of gives Lisa crap for not ever learning an instrument. He's like, you got all the time in the world. Why wouldn't you learn an instrument? And she's just like, I don't know, like maybe you start taking time for granted, and that's a great example. Yes. Yeah. What about the opposite where they want to learn and do everything? Yeah. You become this voracious. I remember, I don't know how many of you played Dungeons and Dragons. I'm sure most of you have heard of it, even if you don't play it. But I was around when Dungeons and Dragons was still on its, kind of first edition. And they actually had, how did they do it? It was level caps on certain races, because they were like, okay, here's an elf, and we've already told you that elves can live to be like 200 or 800 years old. I forget what it was. And they can only progress to 15th level because the creators of the game said, well, geez, if we just let them go to any level they want, in the hundreds of years, you'll have all these elves walking around and they're super powerful beings, because they've got hundreds of years to learn all the swordplay and magic and everything else you could learn in this fantasy setting. And they were like, well, we can't have that. So they just chopped them off and said, no, they can only advance to level 15. And I always hated that. D&D has since lifted those restrictions, but yeah, imagine you could live for that long, and you would, if you wanted to, you could become, whatever you want to be. There used to be this television series. It didn't last very long, and I really enjoyed it. And I want to say it was called Amsterdam or something, but it was about this guy that was immortal. and it was pretty good. He had lived for I don't know how many hundreds of years already at the beginning of the show's, a modern day setting. And he had become a doctor. He'd become a carpenter, or making furniture and all this kind of stuff. He'd done a couple of other things, like he'd reinvent himself and become all these different things because he was so long lived. He didn't just sit and as a couch potato and think, "Oh, I got all the time in the world. I'll learn this later." Kind of like me with guitar, except I'm not immortal and I really need to practice. But this guy, he became a doctor and a lawyer and all this other kind of stuff in his long life. That's the dilemma. It's why it's so interesting, because it's such a rich psychological field to till. Yeah, I can read. A popular phrase in my book is, "What's time to be a god? It could have been an hour ago, it could have been 500 years in the future. To them, it's a moment to be forgotten." Yeah, that's a really good, you bring up a really good point, because I don't know about you, but I feel like when I was in high school, those 4 years were like the longest 4 years of my life. That time just dragged. And it feels like the older I get, the faster time moves. I blink and my kid's in his 20s, and it sounds like a cliche because I feel like every adult I've ever known has talked like this, but then it happens to you and you're like, oh, that's pretty powerful, and I don't know why. It's just something about life. So yeah, someone that's a god would be like, well, 100 years, that's over in a blink of an eye. Like, they probably may not register it the way someone significantly younger would. Playlist, yes. I should have that in my description. So if anyone's looking to see what streams are coming up next, right after this one or later on tonight or tomorrow, the playlist should be in the description below. Yeah, I definitely can lean more towards the comfort than showy. Yep. And the awards. If you want a modern version of Immortals, watch Supernatural. Crowley has a cell phone. I need to catch up on that. I always hear good things about it, and I haven't gotten around to watching that. Kat says she's 20 and 27 at the same generation as my 14 to 17-year-old nieces. Yeah, I mean, you get that overlap. I would always get frustrated when people would throw shade on millennials. And millennials are like in their 40s, and it's all this. If there's any millennials among the stream, you probably are feeling me right now, because all this crap, millennials can't drive standard shifts and millennials can't use cursive. And it's like, what are you talking about? I'm Gen X, but millennials were like our younger cousins and younger siblings. They were only separated by so many years. And the idea that, I know a lot of millennials that they remember the 80s, depending on, when they were born in that little time frame. So the age difference isn't all that great. And you have all these people that are, my generation going, oh, they don't know how to do. So it's kind of crazy when you look at that. And now you flip that and you think about an immortal character that maybe is hundreds of years old. And what do they think of the youth? What do they think of mortals who are teenagers? If 30s look at teenagers the way that they do, or 40-year-olds look at teenagers the way that they do, sometimes, some of these adults will disparage the young generations. It always happened. I think I read somewhere that when paper became prolific in classrooms, right? There was some article in a newspaper written in like the early 1800s lamenting the fact that kids aren't going to bring slates to school anymore. And they're just going to use up all this paper, and it's going to be a waste of resources, and people should value, the time and the written word on a slate. you know, instead, because paper, you could just make a mistake and throw it away. But, you know, slate, you have to really be cautious about what you're writing down, because you'll have to erase it. And then you only got one slate. And, you know, everyone has always been against, not everyone, but progress has always been met with resistance. So, you know, another thing that these immortal beings, these people that are centuries and centuries old, could be thinking about is, you know, what do they think of progress? How do they feel about technology and culture and all this kind of stuff moving forward? Pet and plant parents count. Yes, they do. Thank you. Woohoo. Yes. Yeah. Extra giveaway. If you're 500 plus years old, you'd better be a millionaire. There's zero excuse. Yeah, I think if you, that would be a terrible situation if you were like immortal and you're like, well, my social security just ran out. I guess I don't know what to do. Do I go back to work? What do I what do I do? Yeah, I think that's why you always see the trope of the immortal or someone that's hundreds of years old and they're just wealthy. You know, I think it would be interesting to see a character who's, you know, really, really old and they don't have a lot of money, you know, for whatever reason. You know, maybe they just invested poorly or they lost it all or whatever. Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me of the TV show Pretender, but without the immortality. Yeah. New Amsterdam. Thank you. Oh my God. The feedback form. I'm catching up on all these comments. It is because Inca York says it's because at age 10, 1 month is a 10th of our life, but at 50, I love this. At 50, 1 year is a 50th of our life. It's all in the fractions. By the time we get to 1,000-year-old immortals, the year is a blink. I love that. Yes, that's a wonderful way to look at it. Yep, hear it all the time. Yeah, right. Millennials. So true. Yes. Yeah, millennials are in their 40s. People, I'm like, how old do you think millennials are? Some of these people that say the crazy things that they do. But imagine, you know, imagine some immortal being that's alive now complaining about baby boomers. Oh, baby boomers. They're just a bunch of hippies. They're out protesting and causing all trouble and putting flowers in their hair and listening to their beatnik music. And then someone's like, dude, baby boomers are in their 70s and 80s. What are you talking about? You know, that if we're making mistakes about millennials when we're all in this, you know, 20 to 30 year age span, how out of touch could an immortal being be looking at mortals, you know, and thinking of them in terms of generations, you know? Oh, all those kids from the 60s. Oh boy, don't get me started on those hippies. Gen X here. I do not identify as a millennial. I witnessed the birth of the internet, pagers, and cell phone. Thank you, Star Trek. Right? Like teaching cursive. Yeah, useless skills die, but those who still remember them hate it. Yeah, I remember when my teachers said you don't need to, because we were learning cursive, so you had to write everything in cursive. And then we hit a certain grade, I think it was sometime in middle school, where they were like, yeah, if you don't want to use cursive, you can just print. Doesn't matter. And I'm like, see ya, never use cursive again. Florida's bringing cursive back. Yeah, my son is Gen Z. We're in Massachusetts, and he learned cursive. You know, because I had to ask, like, people were like, oh, cursive's going to disappear. You're going to write in secret code and nobody can read cursive anymore. And I saw these memes and I went to my son. I'm like, did you learn cursive? He's like, yeah. He's like, I don't use it, but he can read it, you know. Too late for my kiddos. Yeah, maybe it's maybe people aren't learning cursive. I don't know. They are in Massachusetts. Immortal with a gambling problem. Oh, that's dangerous. Yep. Compound interest. Yep. I could never read cursive, so I hated being forced to learn and use it. Wish they taught us to type instead. Yeah. I had to. I don't know. I wonder if typing is required now. It should be, I think. If you're in high school or even younger, I think with everything the way that they are, I mean, everyone has a keyboard now. When I was in high school, I had to take typing as like an elective because it wasn't necessary in life. But I knew I wanted to get into computers as a career, so I took typing so I could, program. I got 10 minutes left. All right. Thank you for the warning. I'm just going to check my notes. I'm going to keep going through chat, but I want to make sure I didn't leave off anything. I think I hit all the big major things. I feel like the big lesson, maybe if you take one thing away, is that time is not the destructive force that strips a being, a person, of their youth, however old they are. It's not time. It's not like so there's some mystical, the planet went around the sun this many times, so sorry, you got to lose touch with whatever. That's choice, or those are external forces pressing upon you, forcing someone into that space. So again, do they want to stay current with the times? Do they need to stay current with the times? Can they stay current with the times? And, if they're able to, how accessible is everything? And leverage maybe some of those easy targets like music or fashion or slang to show age without necessarily turning your immortal character into a bump on a log, Typing classes in elementary. Yeah. Oh, you have to do math? You can't carry a calculator every day? Yes. Yeah, I've had math teachers tell me that when I was in high school. You're not always going to have a calculator with you. Oh, nice quote. Saturday happy hour. Awesome. I think I have a few more time left. Oh, we got to do the giveaway. Let's do that. Let's see if I can figure out how to do a thing. Oh, did I do? Maybe that's what I want to do. All right, so I'm going to share screen. I'm going to see if I figure this out. Bear with me. All right, so hopefully people can see this. So if you want to be entered in and win a copy of The Unlife of Lisa Cooper, my book one in my vampire series, then put in # Lisa into chat. And when everyone's submitted, I'll hit the button and we'll see it go. Can everyone see the screen? I want to make sure I'm sharing. I think I am. Oh, Rita joined. I think that might be everybody. Yes, we can see it. All right. Here we go. Oh, the suspense. Oh. Hey, congratulations, Dreamy Truth Author. I'm going to put my email address in the chat. So that's my email address, Dreaming Truth Felicia. Email me, and we'll exchange whatever. I'll get your mailing address, and I'll mail it to you. So congratulations on the win, and I hope you enjoy the book. And I'm just writing to make sure I know how to spell your name when I sign it. Congratulations. I think we're coming up on the end. I think we have maybe 5 minutes left, because I know we end just a little sliver before the next thing. And yes, the feedback form for each session. I hope everyone enjoyed it. I hope that this was useful. Maybe if you're writing an immortal character or a long-lived character, or plan to write one in the future, I hope some of these ideas just at least get some thoughts going about how you could execute on something like that, and have fun with it, because there's a lot there. Long life, a lot of life experiences, a lot of outputs. And thank you all so much for joining the stream. You're very welcome. Thank you so much. Thank you. Are we, I want to ask, are we, I think we're done at like 5 of, right? Thank you, Rita. Thank you. All right. Well, guess I'll sign off here. Congratulations to Felicia, and have a great rest of the conference and weekend. And I'm probably going to shoot over and check out the next stream myself. Thanks, everybody.